Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I am Mike Christensen, and we're talking about what lessons we can learn from episodes of the Critical Role campaigns. Today we're talking about episode 9 of the Vox Machina story, Yug'voril Uncovered. We have no Ashley in this episode, but Travis is back as Grog, who begins this session strapped down to a cart by iron bands in the Duergar camp. The party rolls some pretty bad stealth checks when they're trying to get close to Grog. So there's a brief scuffle, but they do notice that some of these Duergar have glowing green eyes, and that is not something they had before. Scanlan steps forward to speak with Queen Ulara directly. Meanwhile, Keyleth becomes an earth elemental and shifts into the ground, and Tiberius becomes invisible. The queen emerges with a few non-Duergar thralls at her side, and Scanlan lays out an offer.
I'll make it very simple, because my fellows are begging me to keep things simple. It's a simple binary choice. You can all die right now, or you can turn over our friend and we will probably leave you in peace. I would promise, but I don't make promises to dogs.
But the queen won't be very easily convinced.
You took my king from me, came and slayed him in his own throne room. You took something I loved, I take something you love. He's mine now, and I'm bringing him to his greater destiny.
So fighting breaks out, and here are a few highlights. Tiberius uses a fireball to wipe out most of the Duergar and the thralls, and also does a little bit of damage to Grog. Scanlan casts banishment on the queen, sending her away for the rest of the fight. The Mind Flayer tries to, once again, plane shift away, but Tiberius counterspells it.
Counterspell in this edition is so good.
That's great.
So the Mind Flayer just runs away, floats away as fast as it can, until it gets blown up. The party frees Grog, but Ulara returns from her banishment to a party with a bunch of readied actions. They deal some damage, and then Keyleth wraps her up in an Earth Elemental bear hug, so she tries to negotiate. She doesn't really have much she can offer them except for information about K'varn, which the party still really wants. Clarota probes her mind for information, and she just starts spouting off all of this rhetoric about how great K'varn is. And as the party demands to know what is K'varn, she starts to answer, and then she stops. Her eyes go black, but still glowing green. And then K'varn speaks through the queen's body.
Her jaw falls slack for a second, and this voice comes through.
There.
He says he's been following their exploits for a while, but now he can see them, including the invisible Tiberius. He invites them to continue on the path they're already on. He says the temple doors are open, and they are his welcome guests. And then the queen dies, as K'varn fries her brain. Here's a big lesson we can learn, because Matt is trying to work around a problem that plagues so many D&D adventures. How do you set up your villains in advance? In film and TV and literature, this is never a problem, because you can control what the main characters can do, or will do. You can set up the enemy in all sorts of ways before the final fight. You can have them sit down to dinner with the party, or cross blades with the party early to show how powerful he is. Or just cut to him and show him doing his own thing like a bunch. But these are things that are hard to do in D&D. It's not impossible. We will see Matt Mercer tackle some of these tropes in future arcs of Critical Role, but it's hard. More often, the villain just sits in their corner of the dungeon doing their thing until the heroes show up. I talked before about how the abominations, the Stitch monsters that we see throughout the Underdark, kind of act as K'varn's avatars. They're representing him throughout this arc and reminding us that he exists and what he's trying to do. That's why they show up every couple of episodes. It's a reminder from Matt that you're not just dealing with Duergar and Mind Flayers, they are all working under this larger entity. But here we finally get to see the villain interact with the heroes. And Matt does not give away any secrets about what K'varn is, nor does he put K'varn in axe-swinging range. This is the old Emperor Hologram technique. And it's a trope, but for a good reason. It works. You don't want to do it with every villain. In fact, I think Matt only does it with a couple more villains over the course of Critical Role. One of them is not the introduction of the villain for the first time, it's actually after they've already encountered him once. And the other was like literally at the beginning of this year, or late last year? Really, really recently. But it is a great way to give the players a chance to have a scene with the villain without risking your villain getting murdered before the cool final fight. The players are really trying to get more information about K'varn. The entire interrogation of the Queen is centered around it. The Queen starts by talking about how great K'varn is, but the players don't have any patience for that right now. But Matt still does not want to tell the players just what K'varn is. That's not a very dramatic reveal. He has a dramatic reveal in mind. Now, he knows that his plans can change. There's always a possibility of something else happening that seems cooler or that will be more rewarding or fulfilling, and he'll just go with that instead. But that hasn't happened yet. Right now, they're just asking, and he knows that the answer won't just be satisfying if they hear it out loud. They need to experience it, not just hear about it. Show, don't tell. So far, the party has not put themselves into a situation where finding out what K'varn is will be anywhere near as dramatic as what Matt has in mind. But there's only so long that the Queen can talk about K'varn before the fact that she isn't describing him in any physical way becomes pretty artificial. So K'varn takes over the Queen's mind. This may or may not have been planned on Matt's part in advance, but it's a very elegant solution. After all, Matt has already fully established that these villains have access to mind control. We know that from the Mind Flayers, we know that from Queen Ulara having mind control powers over Grog. We know that all of these Duergar, when they first showed up at the beginning of this session, had glowing green eyes. And we know that somehow K'varn has exercised his will over all of these creatures. So it is not a leap of logic that K'varn could use this power to puppet some of his followers. Now, we don't really get a lot of new information in this scene, but that doesn't matter, because it still satisfies their need to get some information about K'varn while still withholding any new information about K'varn. That's the weird catch-22 of having a villain monologue. You don't actually get a ton of information, but it feels like you did because now you've actually interacted with them. All he does is, well, actually, no, we do get new information. K'varn does say, I know you're coming, come anyway. So they know that he's laying some kind of trap for them. That is valuable information. We also know that at least while possessing Ulara, he could see through invisibility. But honestly, this scene is not in the game to satisfy their need for knowledge. At least not entirely. It's really here to fulfill a narrative beat. Yes, it's also here to make sure that the interrogation with the Queen is not completely fruitless. They learn about the trap, and they get to have an interaction with K'varn, which really was the point. They need to interact with him in some way before the big fight. The Stitch monsters as his avatar was not enough. All these Duergar talking about how great he is, or Clarota warning about how dangerous he is not enough. This scene gives us the chance to do just that. That's what the Emperor's Hologram technique does. It's a good trick, and you can use it in your games. It's cheesy, and it's tropey, but it really does work. Now back to the recap, as the members of Vox Machina loot the camp and find a few magic items. Kima also reveals that one of the non-Duergar companions that they encountered was one of her companions when she came into the Underdark. Someone who was turned into a thrall by the Mind Flayers. Keyleth wants to talk to the party, but not to Kima, so Scanlan takes Kima aside to distract her. His specific distraction is conjuring an illusory purple third nipple and showing it to her and asking if it is normal. Keyleth has a bad read on Kima and has ever since they first met her. And the rest of the party points out that it may be because Kima was tortured. That might be why she has been so abrasive. But Keyleth points out that as they just saw with this thrall, everyone that Kima brought on this mission died. And she's also not so sure that Kima's mission is virtuous just because Kima believes it so. Vax rolls an insight check on Keyleth, which apparently is very rare at this point in the campaign, and we get the first on-screen Matt Mercer whisper. Clarota obviously agrees with Keyleth that Kima is not to be trusted and that she is too volatile, but Vax steps in to calm the situation. For about the first 40 episodes or so, I really do think of Vax as the de facto leader of Vox Machina. He doesn't usually come up with the plans, that's much more Vex, Percy, Scanlan, early on Tiberius, but when Vax speaks, everyone else stops. And everyone else listens.
Keyleth, I know you've had a hard time. We all have. I know we're miles below the surface of the world. We're together. We are family. And everyone here is here for you as you have been for us.
Keyleth and Marisha gets emotional. I'm not going to play the clip because there's some crosstalk happening and it's kind of hard to hear what she's saying. But she says, "How do we know we're doing the right thing? We've killed a lot of people, guys. We've killed a lot of people. Now, I already know how some people in these comments are going to point out that the people they've killed are just Duergar, so it's okay, because Duergar are always evil. And yes, according to the text in the monster manual, that is true. But a lot of groups, and this did not start with Critical Role, because my own group went through this a few years before Critical Role even went on the air. I think a lot of groups go through this. A lot of groups eventually begin to ask these questions. Not even just, are we doing the right thing, which is what Keyleth is asking, but literally going further and pointing out that maybe not every enemy soldier that you kill is automatically inherently evil. Yes, the king and the queen of the Duergar did evil things. They tortured Kima. They are making an army to go up to the surface, but does that mean that every soldier that they're killing is evil? Now, some of you might feel that the answer is yes. And if you're coming to that decision because of your own personal feelings on war and morality and politics, I can understand that. But a lot of you might feel that way just because that's what the book says about Duergar. But this is a much deeper conversation that the hobby at large is having right now. And I think a lot of that has to do with the massive fan base that 5e gained. The sales figures seem to suggest that this is the most people who have played D&D at any given time. And so a lot of people who started with 5e are starting to have these conversations all at once because they all started playing around the same time. Because I do think that for some groups, it is just a matter of time before this conversation happens at your table. My group had our version of this conversation around the same time in the campaign that the members of the Vox Machina did, 2 years in. Because the longer you play, the more likely you are to ask these questions. As you become critical of the assumptions made by the world building that is presented in these books. And that was 4th edition, which was even less cut and dry, they're all evil, than the 5th edition books are. I'll make a whole video about this someday, but in the meantime, I do suggest you check out Legal Kimchi's video about bioessentialism, because it is a very well done examination of this subject and some of the assumptions that are being made. Now, back into this scene, Keyleth is also worried about Kima wanting to bring this horn up to the surface. She doesn't feel like that's a good idea. She doesn't feel like bringing this dangerous, evil artifact into the hands of normal humans or humanoids is a good idea. And she also points out they didn't know any of this was happening until they came into the Underdark. She worries that they are interfering in things that they should not. Essentially, she's worried that they are using their powers to do whatever they want. Although she doesn't quite articulate it that way, that's ultimately what she's getting at.
A hero is a violent wanderer who enacts their will bloodily and with strange magics upon the world.
And what I respect here a lot is that the party members do not by any means say that her feelings are not valid. Vax and Vex are primarily the ones who are talking this through with her, and they don't discount anything she's saying. They just point out that this evil is spreading. It has already begun to get people killed. Kavarn's madness, Kavarn's evil, has killed people and is going to kill more. As they point out, monsters have been coming up to Craghammer. That's already begun. And nobody else knows about this. That's why they are the ones who have to deal with it, because they're the only ones who know. And it's happening too quickly to go and get someone who is perhaps more invested in Craghammer and whose problem this would be. Doing that would be too late. They can't run, but Percy does say they will heed her warning. And Clarota points out they did make a deal with him, so there's another reason they should probably stay. Keyleth points out that a lot of murderers have used the gods to justify their actions. This is true in the world of Critical Role, and it is true in the real world. And I would argue it's true about the books themselves. Keyleth does have very real concerns about bringing the horn to the surface, and the party agrees with that. But Vax, who is very aware that Keyleth is very conscious of the mistakes she has made and the bad things they've done, points out that all of them have made mistakes. And while that may not necessarily assuage her concerns, it at least speaks to an understanding of where she's coming from. Her concern, of course, is that they are going to keep doing bad things and telling themselves that it's justified. Which is a fair point, because during the course of this Underdark adventure, they have done things that could pretty easily be described as war crimes. Like, yes, they are not members of a war themselves, but were they soldiers, you can't execute prisoners, for example, and they've done that a couple of times, among other things, and we didn't bat an eye at any of them, because it's D&D. But maybe that's the point. Maybe this is actually a pretty reasonable concern to bring up during a D&D game. You don't have to. By any means, you don't have to do that. It's totally fine if you just want to run the adventure as it's presented and not question any of the violence. That's what they did for 6 or 7 episodes, and probably longer, probably for the full 2 years before they started streaming. But if you want complexity, if you want nuance, sometimes you will find yourself asking these questions in your head. Voice them. Voice them at the table. Voice them in character. This scene is like a signal that the players are ready for more complexity in their game. You can draw a direct line from this discussion to the moral and political complexity of the war in Campaign 2, or even to some of the big plot twists in the Chroma Conclave arc. But Vax, meanwhile, is speaking to Keyleth from a much more personal perspective. By saying that they all make mistakes, he's trying to encourage her to forgive herself, which is something that he knows does not come easily to Keyleth. And of course, they're talking around it, but they are talking about the biggest mistake that Keyleth has made to this point, which is when she accidentally killed a child during a battle in a pre-stream game. Then, as this scene winds down, we cut over to Scanlan and Kima, where Scanlan is preparing to show Kima his genitals, and instead Kima walks away and walks back to the group, and Scanlan is scolded by Grog and a few others. Some jokes didn't age well in the past 7 years, and I totally respect if you don't like this joke, that's fine. But someday I am going to make a video about why Scanlan's jokes work implicitly a lot better than some other jokes in this show, specifically because he is the butt of the joke just about every time. But that's a topic for another day. Keyleth apologizes to Kima for how harsh she came across the other night. Kima tries to reassure Keyleth that she's just trying to do her best. Kima asks for just a bit of patience and understanding, and Keyleth asks for just a little bit more respect from Kima toward the rest of the group, and they come to an understanding. The party makes camp for the night, and we get the first instance of Scanlan joking about the dimensions of his genitals and the cube. A lot of weird firsts tonight. They enter a tunnel of caverns lined with crystal, which Pike recognizes from her vision. Also, we get the first Matt Mercer fake-out.
You reach out and touch the crystal. As you do, go ahead and... No, okay.
They find a boulder wedged into a crack in the wall, and Grog shifts it aside. And inside they find some long-dead members of an adventuring party who had their brains bored out of their skulls by mind flayers. One of the dwarves is wearing a pendant for House Thunderbrand, which is the magical house back in Craghammer. And the party remembers that they were asked to see if they happened to come across any members of an expedition that might have been members of House Thunderbrand. So they take the pendant to bring it back when they come back to the surface. The other dwarven body was not looted and is still wearing its golden armor. But as Vax goes to strip the armor off the corpse, a curse is released, sapping away his strength. Matt checks his notes and realizes Kima actually does have Remove Curse prepared. He doesn't know if Pike does or not because they don't have her spell sheet. But Kima does remove the curse on Vax and from the armor, and then she puts on the armor herself. Kima gives her old armor to Vex, and Vax realizes, wait a minute, Vex got that armor from Kima got that armor from Grog got that armor from Vax, so that's Vax's armor. And we get a bit of a sibling moment.
So roll. Sibling
Squeezing her
fight.
earlobe really hard.
Roll.
Yeah, you two roll. Go for it.
Shit. It's mine.
Sibling justice.
Persuasion versus persuasion? Is this what this was?
Yeah, sure.
They played arm punch until one game. It's mine.
The tunnel leads to a large cave with crystals lining the walls and ceiling. They are on the edge of an underground lake with a huge island in the middle. And on the island, there is a glowing fungal forest. Clarota shares with all of them a mental image of what the caves look like, and we get a map. Keyleth and Grog find a couple of boats under the water, Tiberius lifts them up, and Percy repairs them and makes a boat for all of them. Vex and Tiberius stay on the flying carpet so they can be a little bit more removed from any danger that might occur near the boat, but they lash the boat to Keyleth in the form of a shark, and they begin to explore the caves. They decide to go to one of the caves on the edge of the map rather than go straight to the island. As they journey, though, they can see some sort of pyramid structure in the middle of the fungal forest. This is the temple of the Mind Flayer city. This is where Kavarn resides. And the top of this pyramid glows green, just like Queen Ulara's eyes, just like the eyes of everyone they fought at the beginning of the episode. They find a cave and they enter and they find some dead bodies that have been dead for probably only a few weeks at most. But then one of these bodies moves and looks towards the party, and Matt clarifies that this body is looking at them with unnatural intelligence for a zombie. And that wraps up the episode. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back in 2 weeks with episode 10 as the party continues to explore caves and clear out the fog of war. But we also get a chance to see the villain in action, which is why that episode is called K'varn Revealed. And it's definitely going to be a worthwhile episode to talk about. If you want to support the channel, there are 4 ways to do that. You can subscribe and ring the bell so you get these videos as soon as they come out. You can join the Patreon. Any dollar amount really helps the channel. At $3 a month, you get access to the D&D content that I create for patrons. You also get to join Patreon exclusive live streams with members of the Patreon where we just talk and hang out and I answer questions and maybe we just do some fun, cool stuff. At $5 a month, you get to see these videos early. And at $10 a month, you get your name in the credits of the D&D content I make for the patrons. The third way you can support the channel is by joining the Discord. We have cool people talking about D&D and Critical Role and Dimension 20 and giving advice and setting up games. It's a lot of fun and we'd love to have you. And the fourth and final way you can support the channel is by signing up for my newsletter. The links for all those are in the doobly-doo below. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, play fair and have fun.